Thank you. Hey guys, let's talk about some old stuff, if I can get this to work. Our remote's not working. Boom. Let's talk about some old stuff. I'm gonna have to walk over here because this isn't working. WD-40 is founded in 1953. We've got Kikkoman soy sauce, 101 years old, not bad. Fisker's Scissors was founded in 1649. Katz's, if you've been to Katz's in New York City, or you've seen When Harry Met Sally, it opened when Grover Cleveland was president. My favorite restaurant in Los Angeles, right across the street from the Staples Center, is the Old Pantry Cafe. It's been in business since 1924. And let me turn this off. Hey, can you have someone turn these mics off, because I'm gonna have to come over here? 1924, and you can see there's a line almost any weekday and weekend. You can see people lining up. It's pretty awesome. It's not the best food, but it's the best. This was the oldest existing restaurant in Chicago. It closed last year, but it had a pretty good run. And then this is Daly's, 1918, so 100 this year. I had dinner with Jason Fried last night at Club Lago. He told me it was going to be mediocre, but it's a three-generation, it's been in this family for 3 generations. It actually wasn't bad. 1952, pretty good. This is the oldest business in Chicago. So this newspaper article was when they were celebrating their first century in business in 1937. So they opened in 1837. Lincoln had only been in Illinois for 7 years when they first opened their doors. Not bad. And not everything has to be, centuries old. Craigslist can now legally drink. Not bad. Base Camp, 1999. That's a pretty good run. Almost 2 decades. Laravel, 2011. Again, not bad. Better than most. And so what's interesting is there's this thing called the Lindy effect, which is actually named after a diner in New York City, still in business since 1931. It's right near Broadway. And basically what the Lindy effect says is that for every year you're in business, or for every year your work exists, its half-life decreases, or it decreases by 1 year. So if you've been in business for 10 years, chances are you'll be in business for 20 years. We're not going to suddenly stop reading Shakespeare tomorrow, right? He's going to have if suddenly he became less assigned in schools, it would be a slow decline of 500 years, right? So what the Lindy effect says is that once you get in business, once you stay in business, it increases your chances of continuing to stay in business. And so that's what I'm interested in. This is my cow. Her name is Domino. She's with a copy of the book. But basically what I wrote about and what I think about as a writer is this line from Cyril Connolly. He's a great British writer. He was writing right before the outbreak of the Second World War. He's a literary critic, and he was fascinated by work that stands the test of time. And he said, look, what's going to happen in the next 10 years we don't know, to me, to my friends, and he said to the books that they write. And he said that the mark of greatness of a piece of literature was, can it continue to be relevant after the passage of a decade? And how few books or any work of art is this true for? And this is what I think about as a writer. This is what I think about as a marketer, and what I think about as an entrepreneur. There's what people don't understand about the book publishing industry, which is again where I am, is that the vast majority of income in the book publishing industry comes from books that are what we would call backlists. So in the publishing industry, a book comes out, it's considered a frontlist title, and then after 1 year, it's considered a backlist title. In the music industry, an album is considered a catalog album after 18 months, and actually for the first time 2 years ago, catalog albums the revenue from catalog albums out-earned all new releases combined. So in most intellectual property-based businesses, whether it's music or books or movies, the vast majority of income doesn't come from the movie that was #1 at the box office this year, but from the library of content that they've accumulated, the things that have continued to endure, right? A movie like Shawshank Redemption doesn't do well at the box office, but it makes a killing every single year on TV. A Christmas Story would be another good example of this. And that the problem is the vast majority of focus in each one of these industries is not not on what's made these things last, but on how we can be the trendy new thing right now of the moment. Interestingly enough, in the New York Times bestseller list, which the average person thinks is a reflection of the best-selling books in the country each week, if you scroll down and you read the fine print, it actually explicitly excludes perennial sellers. So the bestseller list is actually on purpose not a reflection of what is selling best. They go, oh, that's not fair, Harry Potter is still selling, let's take that off. The Bible would be the best-selling book in the country every week, but they don't like that, so they exclude these texts. So we have this sort of false picture of what's really working and what's not working, and we focus on what's hot. We see in the newspaper or online who was, again, number one at the box office, who was number one on the Billboard charts. What we don't realize is that an album like Back in Black is selling 500,000 copies every year, year in and year out, and is likely never to stop. And so that's what we call a perennial seller, something that continues to sell even after the marketing cycle, even after the attention, even after the focus of the industry has moved on. Even in the startup industry, you would imagine that the vast majority of income, since new companies are rarely profitable, if we were to somehow look at all the profits created by the capitalist system, the vast majority of the profits would be attributed to companies that are not brand new companies, right? The older the company, the more likely they are to continue to have profits and to continue to be profitable, or they would not continue to exist, right? But then in the startup world, we're constantly focused on, like, why does this even matter, right? Why does it matter which startups raise the most money this spring? It should matter who's making the most money this spring, right? Or who is most likely to actually be a real business that continues to succeed as a business. Or here are the hottest San Francisco startups to watch this year. Again, who cares? I want to know what startups are going to last, what startups are going to stand the test of time, who should I even need to care about because they're not based on some fad or trend. This would be Drake's version of what Cyril Connolly was talking about. I won't embarrass myself by rapping it to you, but who's going to still be around in a decade? This is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to create a legacy. We're trying to create real businesses, real things that employ real people that make the world a better place. It's really hard to make something, so why would we make something that's not going to last? And so I sort of break this down into a number of principles or priorities that I want you guys to think about. And the first would be, if we're thinking about making something that lasts, we have to actually do the work, right? It's really, really hard to make something so good that a century later, it's still relevant to people. It's still doing its job. My friend Austin Kleon has a great line. He says, you can't be the noun without doing the verb. You can't be a founder if you're not actually founding something. You can't be a writer if you're not actually sitting down and writing. You can't be a programmer if you're not actually programming. But we can get so obsessed with marketing, or we get so obsessed with fundraising, or all these ephemeral things that don't really matter or are secondary on top of what our number one priority is, which is to make something that's really fucking great. And not enough people do that, right? People think, oh yeah, I'll get that, right? Or, oh yeah, I've got that. But the truth is they don't. And if they could sit down and view their own work objectively, they'd see how much work was left to be done. So Elon Musk compares starting a company to eating glass and staring into the abyss of death. That's probably pretty close to it. Anyone that's ever written a book or founded a company knows that this is true. George Orwell said that writing a book was like a bout with a long illness. He said you have to be driven by some demon or you'll never get through it. And I think that's a great way to think about it because, again, if you're starting a company or an app or you're writing a book or you're making a movie because you think it would be fun, I mean, just get out of here, right? It's so beyond that. You know how Amazon and Zappos have this policy of like they'll pay you to quit after 90 days? That's how you should think about it. If you can do anything else, if you're even thinking about doing something else, like just take the money and run, because this is not going to be fun. It's going to be eating glass, right? It's going to be really, really hard. When I work on a book, it's hundreds of drafts, it's thousands of pages that get torn up, it's hour after hour of working on this thing that's never as good as it is in my head, that requires all sorts of painful feedback and editing. It's not fun. Having a book is fun, writing a book is not fun, right? Having a company that's gotten over the chasm or that's gone through the valley of death, being on the other side is great, but when you're in it, when you're in the shit, it's not fun, right? And so you have to be that's why your sort of intention, why you're doing this, has to be more than just, oh, it's what other people I know are doing. You have to have some deeper purpose to get you through. So every day I save, the draft that I'm working on, and so ultimately my Dropbox is just filled with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documents as my work is getting 1% better. I'm adding 500 words. Cal Fussman is talking about how this one piece that he wrote, just one article, required him to wait 10 years to get the sentence that he needed to get right. But if you put that time in, if you do that work, that's going to be the kind of piece that's going to still be relevant 10 years after he's written about it. When you take shortcuts, when you do the easy route, chances are what you're making is not going to stand the test of time. This is the La Sagrada Familia. It's not done yet. It's supposed to finish in 2026, which will be the 100-year anniversary of the architect's death. So if you've ever worked on a project that went a little bit over budget, maybe that took longer than you thought, to me, this is something to think about. Okay, it might not even be done a century after I die, but this is so important to me, and I've built inside of it the principles of something that's really important and meaningful, and so I'm okay. I'm okay actually just focusing on the process. I think about that with my books. I don't actually know for certain whether they'll ever be published, but the process itself is important enough to me that even if I get only halfway there, it will have been worth my time. And so you want to stand back and go, look, is this thing that I'm working on actually worth being that level of commitment and work? And if it's not, that's probably a sign that there might be some tweaking or changes or perhaps a totally new conception of what that is to get it to where I want it to be. And then let's think, what am I making? Is this thing actually unique? Is it actually going to stand out? Is it going to be something that's still going to be valuable and important in the future? And so, right, a wonderful book is Blue Ocean Strategy, if you haven't read it, but saying red ocean is where there's lots of competition, blue ocean is where there's no competition. You want to head for blue ocean. You want to make something new and special and unique that other people aren't making. Peter Thiel's line, which I love, he says, competition is for losers. What he means is that when you compete head-to-head with entrenched people, you are increasing your chances of losing, right? And so often we see competition like, hey, lots of people are in this space. Lots of people are making apps like this. Lots of people are creating websites or services like this. So there must be something good there. Sure, but there's also less chance of you dominating that space, of being the only one. What you want to do is invent something new or create something new where you're the only one doing it, right? Every person is utterly and completely unique. You've got unique DNA, unique circumstances. So you want to think about, what is the thing that only I can do? There's lots of books I can write, but I should only publish the ones that I'm the only person in the world that can publish, because then I have a monopoly on that thing. And if you've read 0 to 1, Till talks about this a lot. Monopoly is where the money is, right? Monopoly is where dominance is and where endurance is. And so where is there the least competition? Where can you have a monopoly? This is what you want to ask yourself as you're conceiving of and tweaking and improving your idea. You want to go away from what other people are doing and towards what only you can do. When I was thinking about writing Perennial Seller, because I have a business that markets books for authors, we've worked with authors who have sold millions of copies. Originally, I was just going to write a book about the best book marketing tactics. And I sold it to a publisher. We got a nice advance. And then as I sat down to read it, I had to follow my own advice, which was, okay, is this unique? Well, no, there's lots of books published by this. And some are not very good and some are okay. But then I realized that I'm going to have to compete with these crappy books that other people have been writing. Your first 1,000 copies is pretty good, so I'm not saying that one sucks. But my point is, I'm going to have to steal market share away from these people if I want to last and endure. And that's not something I want to spend my time doing. So I had to come up with a unique angle. And so that's why I came up with the idea of, okay, I'm not looking to make a bestseller. I'm looking to make a book that sells I want to teach people how to make something, not just books, but any products that sells the best over a long period of time. So where can I go know that's unique and special. That's what I want to do. And that this is ultimately the best marketing decision that I can make, right? Instagram launches as Bourbon, which is a competitor to Foursquare. It doesn't work. They pivot to Instagram. They're the only photo sharing app that you can add filters on, blah, blah, blah. That's the single best marketing decision that Instagram makes. This product pivot is their best marketing decision. So if you've read the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, one of the best marketing books out there, they say, look, it's better to be first than it is to be better. Marketing is the battle of perception, not products. So you want to be the first to something new, the first person in a space. That's law number one. But what if you can't do that? Well, that's law number two. If you can't be first to a category, just invent your own new category, right? Or just rebrand what you are doing as its own category. And so this is an essential marketing decision. So this is what I did with the book, right? Instead of being first to the book marketing space because I couldn't, I was going to be first to this space, this idea of making things that last. And so you have to pivot your ideas to where there is the least amount of competition, because this increases your chances of dominating and having a monopoly. Rick Rubin would say that the best art divides the audience. So where can you be really awesome to a core group of people and then be okay pissing off all the people who are not your customers, right? And thinking about, look, I'm okay. What I'm trying to do is make something unique that's not been made before, that's special, that's only me. And actually that sort of polarizing reaction when people are saying, what they're doing is crazy, they shouldn't be doing that, I'm upset about that, I don't like it, I'm boycotting that. These are actually often signs that you're on the right path, right? When there's controversial media attention about what you're doing, it means you're challenging the status quo in some way and doing something that's new. And this is probably a sign that you're going to continue to have polarizing reactions in the future, or that you're just ahead of the curve and then the world is going to be catching up to what you're doing. And then, of course, there has to be some element of timelessness in what you're doing. If I'd written, I'm looking at this and there's a lot of books about book marketing, but I'm going to be the best guide to marketing your book on social media. Well, now I've rooted myself on today's social media, what's popular right now, and now I've already put an expiration date on what I'm doing. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make. Rick Rubin also talks about this. He says, look, when you're recording an album, you're writing the songs, he says, don't listen to the radio, don't see what's popular right now. He says, go to a museum like this, and see the great works of art, or the great inventions, or the great sort of icons of history, and find what's common in them and root your work in these larger ideas, not what the current landscape is favoring, because the current landscape might not be sustainable. It might be a complete fad. I was the director of marketing at a company called American Apparel for a number of years. And American Apparel became $1 billion company by making timeless classics, right? Socks, t-shirts, underwear, hoodies, whatever. They were manufacturing 50 million garments a year, stores in 20 countries. And the largest garment manufacturer in the United States are killing it. And then the CEO started to see that Forever 21 and H&M and Uniqlo were killing it with more stylish pieces. And instead of saying, well, we are rooted in something classic and that our entire business model depends on making clothes that we're going to sell every single season, he started copying what his competitors were doing. And then as he made fashionable clothes that didn't sell every year, he began to choke and drown on his own inventory. The company eventually went bankrupt. A company that was once worth over $1 billion sold for $60 million in its second bankruptcy, mostly because it stopped being unique and it stopped basing what it was doing on timelessness and instead based on very timely trends. And other manufacturers can work in that space, but they make cheaper clothes, they outsource their labor. It was just not sustainable. And so you got to focus on what you're doing, and ideally you want to root it in what's going to last. Right? When Groupon was big, everyone said, oh, we got to get in the daily deal space. But that space really doesn't even exist anymore. Nobody cares. But if you had pivoted your business, or you tried to build a business on that because it's trendy, well, you're now regretting that decision. And so it's like we want to make sure we're not chasing the equivalent of fidget spinners, whatever that is in our business. I'm not saying you can't make money selling fidget spinners, but I would bet my life you're not going to still be making money selling fidget spinners 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, right? And so are you making sure that you're not chasing whatever that fad is? Maybe it's cupcake shops, or it's poke bowls, or food trucks, or whatever the trend is. You got to ask yourself, is this trend going to last, or am I just trying to surf a wave that is eventually going to crash, right? Nobody wants to be this guy. That's not to say there's not a lot of opportunities in crypto generally, and that there might not be some level of profound sort of disruption and change there. But the last thing you want to do is be chasing some fad and trying to capitalize on that fad, because now you've bet your entire business, your entire career on something that's outside of your control. Seneca, I read a lot about the Stoics in my other works. Seneca has this concept he calls euthymia. And basically what he says is, he's like, you got to make sure that you're on your path and not be distracted, he says, by the paths that crisscross yours, particularly the paths of people who are hopelessly lost. And so we often look at our competitors or people who are doing something similar, and we try to use that to triangulate where we should be. And this is a bad idea, because those people might be lost, those people might be idiots, those people might have bad businesses. We have to root what we're doing in the timeless principles that we know are important, and then stick to that. And so, again, this is what he's saying, make sure you're not being distracted by the people who are wandering far from the path. And so, what is my business? What's my core mission? What am I actually rooting this business in? Who are my actual peers, people who are doing something that's actually similar to me? Maybe I can use them as some bit of evidence, but ideally I want to compare myself and my business only to my own potential. And Jason and I were talking about this yesterday. You build Basecamp. It's been in business for almost 15 years at that point. It's doing great. And then Slack comes along. Do you want to abandon the principles that you rooted your business in to do what some competitor is doing, even if they're raising a lot more money, even if they're getting all the attention? But what if, and this is what's true about Basecamp and Slack, is that they're encouraging completely different workplace cultures. Slack is about as many sort of interruptions and messages and stuff being thrown at you as possible, and Basecamp is about an elimination of all those things. And so we often see what I think is so great about what Basecamp did is that it stayed true to what it was doing, did not do what American Apparel was. It did not basically commit suicide because someone else was doing great near them. And that's going to be really important as you're making a business that lasts. Jeff Bezos' line is focus on the things that don't change. Yes, Amazon tries to create new technologies, tries to capitalize on various trends. They're an innovation-first culture. They take risks. But at the same time, everything is rooted in basically the principle that people like cheap stuff, and they want the stuff as quickly as possible, right? This is sort of Amazon's ethos. And that even if they are experimenting with a phone or delivery or Prime or whatever it is that they're inventing, they're still rooting it in those timeless principles. If it violates those principles, they're not going to do it. So you want to focus on the things that don't change. At the end of the day, the customers of that jewelry store that opened in 1837 are not that different than the people who are shopping for an engagement ring in 2018, right? We're just people. We want stuff. We want to buy things that impress other people. We don't want to spend more than we have to. We want to know we're not being tricked, right? We want to be treated well. We want high quality products. At the end of the day, people don't change. We're the same. And the more technology changes, in fact, the more those common traits continue to be true. I don't know if you've read Guy Kawasaki's book, Enchantment. About 7 or 8 years ago, he wrote this book about creating this sort of love affair between a product and its customers, and built. Great, it's a great book, continues to sell. We have the same publisher. Clearly, that book is going to continue to sell much better than the book that he wrote after, which was a guide to Google+. Not a great idea to root your work on something else that's. People are always going to want to be enchanted. They're not necessarily always going to want to know how to use Google+. And even if he'd made the right bet, right? Like even if several years before he'd wrote a guide to Facebook, It's still not a great idea because Facebook in 2005 is totally different than Facebook in 2015, which is totally different than Facebook in 2018. So you want to make something, again, that's timeless, that's not going to change. This is ideally what you want to build your business on. I'm an investor in a company called Vinyl Me, which is a mail order record club for vinyl records. You would think this is a crazy business, right? Who wants vinyl records? Well, in fact, 50,000 paying customers every month want to be a member of this club, right? And vinyl records are a 50-year-old technology, right? There's certainly been dips or trends, but it's not going anywhere. It's been in business vinyl has been a medium that people have enjoyed for 50 years. Tomorrow, we're not going to stop using vinyl records. It's not going to be for everyone, but some people are always going to want to use that. And so I want to be basing my stuff on what's going to endure, what's continued to endure. So it's in that way, it's sort of finding the timelessness even in the timely. There's a wonderful other restaurant in LA called Clifton's Cafeteria. It's been in business since, I think, 1925, 26. And what's so great about it is one of the trendiest sort of restaurateurs in LA, instead of trying to open a new sushi restaurant or build a business from scratch, he just bought this business that had sort of been run down, that wasn't being taken good care of. And then he spent a ton of money renovating it. He improved it. He made what was classic about it even more classic. And now it's this awesome place in downtown LA. So again, basing or investing in something that's already working has a higher chance than inventing something that's totally new. Even when I write, this is an early draft of the book, I realized I was joking about all these things. I was talking about Beanie Babies or MySpace pages or Groupon clones. And the problem is, my editor pointed out to me, she said, look, if somebody is reading your book in 15 years in Thailand, are they going to have any idea what the hell you're talking about? And the answer was no. And so I crossed these sections out of the book, and I want to make sure even the examples, even the sales pitches that I'm making are rooted in sort of references or ideas that are going to continue to be relevant over time. And so the idea is what will last the longest, what will stand the test of time. These are the sort of factors you've got to think about when you're making your work. You know, Jon Favreau talks about this with Iron Man and with A Christmas Story and with Elf. You know, the idea of movies that are based on the hero's journey or based on a recurring event like Christmas every year are going to do better over the long term than something that's based on a trendy moment that's really important right now. You think about Star Wars versus Avatar. Obviously, Avatar did amazing when it came out, but can anyone here name a single line from the movie Avatar? It's like that movie didn't even happen, right? It was technologically stunning. But no, I don't even remember what Avatar is about. I just remember that I saw it. But Star Wars is based on the same myth as Jesus Christ and the Odyssey and Gilgamesh, right? And so the reason that Star Wars, although less technically innovative, although it was innovative when it came out, is ultimately, you know, this multi-billion-dollar franchise that people's grandchildren are now going to see because it's based on it got the closest to what stands the test of time. And then, of course, look, the product just has to do its fucking job. If it doesn't do its job, it doesn't matter any of this, right? I'm not wearing them today. It's a little hot, but I have this pair of Red Wing boots. They were $300 when I bought them. I thought that was crazy. I think I'm on my third set of soles for them, and I've had them for almost 10 years. Red Wing, which makes its boots in the U.S., has been making boots since it's got a government contract to make boots for the U.S. Army in the First World War. So they just make amazing boots. I remember when I bought them, they were a little stiff, and I was reading online, and they were like, oh, you want to soften them up? Just wear them in the shower. And so I did. And it's softened the leather up. They're the most comfortable pair of boots that I have. They do the job, right? And so ultimately it doesn't matter, any of the stuff we're talking about doesn't matter if the product isn't really good, if it doesn't do the job for the people who want it. And it's always amazing to me how rarely people can even define the job their product is supposed to do. Like, can you actually answer this question about your business? This is a blank that does blank for blank. To know what your product is, what it actually does, and who it does it for is the essential question that every creator and programmer and designer and entrepreneur has to make. Even more than an elevator pitch, if you don't know what you're doing and why you're doing it and who you're doing it for, how are you possibly going to do something right? My editor said to me on one of my first books, it's not what a book is, right? I was saying, well, I want this to be a book that's like this and that looks like this. And she's like, what matters is what it does. What does it do for the reader? What does it deliver for the reader? What does your product do? Why are there asses in seats? Why are people opening their wallet and handing you money? If you can't answer that question, you're not going to continue to survive. You're not going to survive. Max Martin, one of the most successful songwriters of all time, subjects all his songs to what he calls the Pacific Coast Highway test. He gets in a car, he rolls down the window, he puts the demo on, and he drives up and down PCH. If it doesn't make that experience better, if he doesn't enjoy it on one of the best drives in the entire United States, the song is not going to work on the radio. It doesn't matter how famous the person is, doesn't matter how many fans they have, it's not going to be a bona fide hit if it doesn't pass the Pacific Coast Highway test. Metallica does a similar one, they just call it the car test. You listen to a song like Fuel, look, it passes the car test, right? It just does the job. And so does your product pass whatever the use case test is for what you're doing? And you've got to be able to objectively evaluate those results and say, look, the best marketing thing I can do right now is to stop and improve this thing until I get an A on this test, right? Peter Thiel was talking about if you focus on near-term growth above everything else, you miss the most important question that you can be asking. Will this business still be around a decade from now, right? Will people still be wearing boots in a decade from now? Will people still want to be sending money to each other over the internet? That's PayPal. Yes. If you can't answer that question, doesn't matter how effectively you do it now, you're probably not going to be able to effectively do it in the future if nobody wants that thing. So all this being said, you've got a great product, it fills a real and compelling need, it's based on something timeless, amazing. Well, now you got to get people to find it. If you build it, they will not just automatically come. The shelves groan under the weight of undiscovered masterpieces. Or even if great things eventually find their audience, nobody wants to be Herman Melville and people realize that Moby Dick is a great book after you die. Like, what good does that do you? So you want to make you've got to do the work, you've got to hustle now to get people to find it. So with every one of my books, I hustle the shit out of it, right? I give away as many copies as possible. I do every podcast I can. I spend every dollar I can on advertising. I want people to discover it. I sold the rights to one of my books to Tim Ferriss. So I lost money in the short term because it wasn't as good a deal as I could have got selling it to someone else. But he had an enormous podcast. I was the 4th guest on his podcast, and it sold literally hundreds of thousands of books for me. So marketing can be untraditional things. It can be a distribution play. It can be giving equity to an influencer. It can be a number of things, but does it get your work in people's hands? You know, the idea of, the enemy of the creator is not piracy, it's obscurity. How can we bust out of obscurity to get people to find our stuff? You can't have word of mouth if no one has used your product. I give tons of my books away. This is an Olympic gold medalist that we sent copies to. On the one hand, I don't like giving my stuff away for free. I mean, I worked really hard. I want to sell it. But I know that the more people I can get to use it, the more they're going to tell people about it. Since I fixed the other stuff, I made something that's so good people want to tell their friends. I got to get people to use it so they can tell their friends. Gave thousands of books away in professional sports, and then I started getting media attention for it. I didn't go out and pitch media, say, hey, write about my book, it's great. I got actual people to use it in the real world, and then it deserved the trend stories that were written about it, right? The marketing has to be a reflection of the reality of what you're doing. This is Nick Saban reading Marcus Aurelius. That took a lot of work to make happen, right? That didn't just magically happen. This is another thing. So right here, I don't know if this laser pointer is working, but so the first spike before the huge one, that was me getting featured in the New York Times, sold a couple books, and then the middle one was Tim Ferriss writing about the books, right? So huge spikes come from untraditional things. It's not what everyone thinks, and I've done tons of crazy stuff for people's books. I held an atheist church service for an author that I worked on in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I sent a book into space. I've run advertisements with totally nude women in them. with James Altucher. We were the first book to sell on Bitcoin. I think 7 people bought it on Bitcoin, but then it got tons of publicity because this was interesting and unusual, and then people bought the book with actual money. Although we should have kept the Bitcoin that we got for it because this was in 2013. People think, I'll just throw advertising dollars at it. But the truth is, how many of us actually discover things from advertising? Advertising is gasoline you can pour on a fire, but it very rarely gets things going. This is F. Scott Fitzgerald's editor. He's talking to someone who says, why aren't you advertising for my book? And he says, look, the car's got to be moving before that's going to make a difference. And so you're not magically going to be able to make a movement with advertising, but again, you can pour gasoline on one that's already working. And then the final thing is community, right? If you build it, they won't come. But one of the best ways to launch a product is to already have a community that you tell something about. This conference is a great example, right? Got people in a room, they can tell them about things, right? So can you have a platform that you can launch from? And then are you also making sure, acquiring new customers is great, but if you're treating your customers poorly, you're losing customers, you're not actually making progress, there's no growth. Stefan Zweig, one of the great novelists of the 20th century, saying the most valuable success a writer can have is a faithful following. People who look forward to doing to whatever you do next. And if you don't have that kind of relationship, it's unlikely you're going to have much in the way of a sort of a perennial career. I saw Iron Maiden, they're one of my favorite bands. I saw them in San Antonio a few years ago. You wouldn't think that Iron Maiden, 40 years after they were invented, after they had started, could sell out a stadium in San Antonio, but they can. They haven't been on the radio in probably 39 years. They haven't been on TV basically ever. I mean, they have 3 guitarists. What band has 3 guitarists? It's crazy. They've never cared about trends. Bruce Dickinson, the lead singer of Iron Maiden, says, look, we're farmers. And we only care what we're doing in our field. We don't care what the other farmers are doing. But they've built a hardcore, loyal fan base, often cases in countries that don't have a big music scene. They sell at stadiums in Egypt and in Brazil and in Chile. They have a huge following all over the world. They actually fly, the lead singer, this is insane, flies a jumbo jet with the band in it. He's also a pilot, and he flies them from tour to tour. It's insane. But this is what they do. They don't care about trends, but they care about, there's this great line from their manager. It was some industry event. He was getting an award, and a young agent came up to him and he said, I love the work you've done with Iron Maiden. I'm a huge fan. And he said, I'm a huge fan of the work you've done in the industry. And he thinks, he said, you think I'm in the music industry? And he's like, I'm not. I'm in the Iron fucking Maiden business, right? That's what you want to be in. You're not in the tech space. You're not in the entrepreneurial space. You're not in the app space. You're in whatever you make space, right? I'm in the Ryan Holiday business. I'm not in the publishing business, right? I'm in, all I care about are my fans. This is more. There's a lot of dudes. I'll admit that. A lot of dudes. Lady Gaga is often compared to Madonna, and she said, I'm not the next Madonna, I'm the next Iron Maiden. And if you actually think about her career, it's actually been a while since you've heard her have some smash hit, right? But that's because you're probably not a Lady Gaga fan. She just had her best tour ever, I think, last year. Because her fans were there, and she calls them little monsters, and they have this crazy love affair with each other, right? That's her business, and so that's what you want to develop. A different programming language could not get all these people in this room, and so that's what you're trying to do. One of the things I decided to do when I wanted to become an author, I said, look, I got to tell people about my books. So I started an email list where I do nothing but recommend books. Not my books, just other books. I'm not competing with these other authors, but people who like books are likely to like my books. And this list started with 90 people. It was small enough that I could just copy and paste all their emails in the BCC field in Gmail. Then you get to about 500, and then they block you for spamming. And then I started on MailChimp. In 2014, it got up to 35,000 people, and I sent it out last Sunday to 95,000 people. And there's some people on the list who don't even know that I'm an author because I've only sent 7 emails to this list about my own books, right? So like 7 times in 7 years have I even monetized this list, but I have a hardcore following, people who love books, and that's my thing. Each one of my books has a page in the back that tries to capture the email address or the phone number or establish my relationship with those people. I'm not trying to sell more and more books. I want to sell more and more books to the people who have already bought one of my books, right? I've worked with authors who have sold literally millions of copies of their work, and then each subsequent book, they're starting from scratch. It's as if they've sold 0 books, because they have to build that audience totally from scratch. And that's a huge mistake. If you want to endure, you've got to build a community around what you're doing. I wrote a book called The Daily Stoic, and it's great. The book sold well, but we've also built a community. It's an email list of 150,000 people. It's an Instagram account of 150,000 people. We've built a business on the back where we sell products that have much better profit margins than books do. And so in this way, the books are almost a loss leader for the actual business. And so that's the idea, is you want to build a community, a hardcore fan base around what you're doing. And ideally, you want to do it as early as possible, because you're going to want it later. When Iron Maiden found that, look, nobody will put us on TV, we're not getting radio play, they didn't really care because they had a hardcore fan base of 1 million people, right? Kevin Kelly says, you want to have 1,000 true fans. Well, ideally, you want to have a lot more than 1,000 true fans. You want to have 100,000 or 200,000 or 1 million. You want to have your hardcore fans who, like Zwag was saying, buy every single thing that you do and in fact, look forward to that new thing. And then, look, it's not just about timelessness, but are you giving it time? So many people put something out, doesn't work, 2 weeks later, they're done, right? A movie fails at the box office and the studio quits on it. You want to build a slow and steady relationship with your fans. In The Count of Monte Cristo, they're looking at these old paintings, and he's saying, I don't like the new paintings as much as I like these old paintings. He says, well, that's because the new paintings haven't been around long enough for them to be old paintings. You got to get through that dip. You got to stick with it long enough that there can almost be that nostalgia for what you've made. People remember fondly when they discovered your thing for the first time and how you've continued to grow for them. You go to an Iron Maiden show, and it's guys with their kids, right? That's really awesome. People who are introducing the next generation of fans to what you're doing. You can't just quit. Sometimes it takes a while to get discovered. Seth Godin was saying, look, you got your launch, that's your launch, but what happens after the launch? If you quit, nothing happens after the launch. If you stay at it, you can have that slow, steady growth. Steve Martin is saying, look, obviously you want it to be a hit when it comes out. I want my books to be on a bestseller list. I want to sell lots of copies. But 5 years later, are they still selling? 15 years later, is it still around? That's what you want. You want to have that afterlife. And you can't have that if you just walk away. The last thing I would say is that, you might have noticed I didn't give a lot of sort of specifics, like do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. Here's a good marketing trick. The problem is those things are not perennial, right? When I was writing the book, Snapchat was called Snapchat, and now it's called Snap. And then it got its lunch eaten by Instagram, right? So these specific things are always going to be changing. What you want, this is a line from Epictetus. He has a student, he says, tell me what to do, tell me how to be. And he says, no, that's not what, you want to be adaptable to circumstances. You want to have principles. You want to have a way of thinking, like focus on the things that don't change. Divide the audience, be unique, avoid competition. The larger principles are what's going to be true over time. Different fads and trends are going to come and go. So are you basing your tactics, your strategy, your business on things that are going to let you be adaptable to whatever's happening in the world, whether it's a bull market or a bear market, whether there's tons of VC money out there or no VC money, whether customers are interested in trying new things or they're distracted by, the geopolitical scene, whatever it is, you got to be adaptable to whatever it's going, because this is your business. You can't afford to not be, right? If you have a set of tricks or tactics that only work in one environment, you're not going to be able to survive those things.